The vanilla-scented candles had burned halfway down, casting long shadows across the dining table Wendy had so carefully arranged. The salmon, once perfectly seared, now sat cold and untouched on the bone china plates that had been a wedding gift from Alex's mother. A bottle of champagne sweated in its ice bucket, the cubes long melted into a pool of tepid water. Wendy smoothed the tablecloth for the 100th time, her fingers tracing the delicate embroidery as she glanced at the clock. 9:47 p.m. Their anniversary dinner was supposed to have begun at 7. She'd texted Alex 4 times, called twice, each message more desperate than the last. No response. The house felt cavernous in its silence, the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway an accusation with each passing second. Wendy sat perfectly still in her navy blue dress, the one Alex had once said brought out the ocean in her eyes, feeling the crushing weight of loneliness pressing down on her chest. 5 years of marriage had led to this, an empty chair, cooling food, and the dawning realization that perhaps she'd been dining alone for much longer than just tonight. The beautiful home they'd built together suddenly felt like a museum of what once was, photographs on the walls capturing smiles that had long since faded, mementos from vacations when they'd still held hands and meant it. Wendy took a shaky breath and blew out the candles, darkness swallowing the room just as it had been steadily consuming her marriage. The memories flooded back as Wendy cleared the untouched plates from the table. Their first anniversary. Alex surprising her with a weekend in Paris. Rose petals scattered across the hotel bed. Their second. A private dinner on the beach, toes in the sand, promises whispered under stars. Their third. Handwritten letters exchanged over a homemade meal, plans for the future detailed with such certainty it seemed impossible they would ever change. Even last year, though things had begun to cool between them, Alex had remembered a quiet dinner and a silver bracelet that now felt heavy on her wrist. How quickly things had unraveled in just 12 months. Wendy's phone buzzed on the counter, startling her from her thoughts. Her sister's name illuminated the screen. "Hey, how's the anniversary dinner going?" Catherine's cheerful voice rang through. Wendy's throat tightened, pride battling with the urge to crumble, to admit that her carefully curated image of marital bliss was shattering. "Great," she lied, forcing lightness into her voice. "Alex is just in the other room taking a work call. You know how it is." The lie tasted bitter, but the alternative, acknowledging out loud that her husband had forgotten their anniversary entirely, felt like admitting failure. "He's on his way," she added, more to convince herself than her sister. After hanging up, Wendy sank to the kitchen floor, hugging her knees to her chest. The house was so quiet she could hear her own heartbeat, a lonely rhythm marking time in a space that used to pulse with laughter and love. The lock on the front door clicked at 12:07 a.m., the sound jolting Wendy awake from where she dozed off on the couch, still in her dress, waiting. Alex stumbled in, his tie loosened, hair slightly mussed. The subtle scent of unfamiliar perfume clung to him like an invisible marker. Wendy's stomach clenched as he dropped his keys noisily into the ceramic bowl by the door, a bowl she had handmade in a pottery class he'd given her as a gift when they were still dating. "You're home late," she said, her voice even, controlled, betraying none of the turmoil churning inside her. Alex startled, clearly not expecting her to be awake. "Work dinner," he mumbled, not meeting her eyes. Lost track of time. As he moved past her toward the stairs, the hallway light caught it, a smudge of red on his collar. Not bright red, but a deep burgundy that matched neither any lipstick Wendy owned, nor anything that could be explained away as food or drink. It screamed of intimacy not meant for her to witness. Wendy opened her mouth, questions and accusations hovering on her lips, but then closed it again as Alex brushed past, heading upstairs without so much as a backward glance or apology for missing their anniversary. His shoulders were rigid with what she recognized not as regret, but as the defensive posture of someone caught. The staircase creaked under his weight, each step taking him further away from her, not just physically but emotionally. In that moment, watching him retreat, Wendy knew. The distance between them wasn't just growing, it had become a chasm filled with secrets. Wendy remained downstairs long after Alex had gone to bed. She moved through the kitchen mechanically, wrapping the uneaten salmon and placing it in the refrigerator, washing dishes that had never been used, wiping down counters that were already clean. Each domestic act felt like a desperate attempt to maintain normalcy in a world suddenly tilted on its axis. Upstairs, Alex had fallen asleep almost immediately. She could hear his steady breathing through the partially open bedroom door when she finally climbed the stairs. There was a time when they would have talked through any misunderstanding, when silence was not their default language. Now, as she carefully removed her earrings and placed them in the small ceramic dish on her dresser, she realized that what hurt most wasn't a fight they'd had or words that had been exchanged in anger. It was the complete indifference. The way he could forget their anniversary. The way he could come home bearing evidence of another woman and simply go to sleep. The way he didn't even try to hide it well, as if her noticing didn't matter enough to warrant caution. Wendy changed out of her dress, hanging it carefully in the closet, and pulled on a soft, worn t-shirt. She couldn't bear to lie beside him tonight. Instead, she went back downstairs and reheated a small portion of the salmon. Sitting alone at the kitchen island, she ate mechanically, tasting nothing. The clock on the microwave glowed 1:24 a.m. 5 years of marriage, and she was celebrating their anniversary by eating cold fish in the middle of the night, alone. The bathroom mirror reflected a woman Wendy barely recognized. Her eyes, usually bright and engaged, looked dull and surrounded by faint shadows. The navy blue dress that had once made her feel beautiful now hung on her frame like an artifact from someone else's life. She studied her reflection critically. When had she started to disappear? It wasn't a sudden vanishing but a gradual erosion, like a shoreline retreating under constant waves. She thought back to the vivacious woman she'd been before meeting Alex. The ambitious marketing executive with bold ideas who spoke confidently in boardrooms. The friend who organized spontaneous weekend trips, the daughter who called her parents every Sunday without fail to share stories of her week. Somewhere along the way, those parts of her had receded, replaced by a woman who checked her husband's mood before speaking, who canceled plans with friends because Alex might want to do something, who measured her worth against his approval. Tears streaked silently down her face, dropping onto the marble countertop. She didn't bother wiping them away. "Who are you?" she whispered to her reflection, the question hanging in the steam-filled bathroom. The woman staring back had no ready answer. She had become a ghost in her own life, haunting the periphery of a marriage that now seemed built on illusions. For the first time, Wendy allowed herself to acknowledge what she'd been feeling for months. She wasn't just losing Alex. She had already lost herself. And perhaps that was the greater tragedy. The first entry was the hardest. Wendy sat at her small writing desk in the guest bedroom, a leather-bound journal open before her. The blank page seemed to mock her hesitation. She'd bought the journal months ago, drawn to its handcrafted cover and creamy pages, but had never found the right moment to begin. Now, in the quiet morning hours while Alex slept, she uncapped her pen and began to write without censoring her thoughts. "Today I became invisible," she wrote, the words flowing more easily than expected. "Last night, my husband came home with another woman's lipstick on his collar and didn't even bother to explain. He forgot our anniversary. Or worse, remembered and chose not to care. I sat at our table for hours, waiting, making excuses to myself, to my sister. When did I become this person who waits? Who makes excuses? Who accepts less than she deserves?" The words poured out, raw and unfiltered, filling page after page. She wrote about the gradual cooling of their relationship, the increasing frequency of his late nights, the growing pit in her stomach each time his phone buzzed and he turned the screen away. She wrote about her suspicions, her fears, her anger, not just at him, but at herself for allowing her world to shrink to accommodate his. When she finally set down her pen, hands cramping and tear tracks dried on her cheeks, sunlight was streaming through the blinds. For pages filled with her handwriting stared back at her, the first honest conversation she'd had in months, even if it was only with herself. Wendy hadn't planned to search Alex's things. She wasn't the snooping type, had always believed that trust was fundamental to their relationship. But when she found herself alone in the house the following weekend, something propelled her toward his office. His wallet sat on the desk where he'd left it in his rush to make a business meeting early Saturday morning. She hesitated only briefly before opening it. Behind his credit cards and driver's license was a folded receipt she might never have found if she hadn't been looking so carefully. Westin Hotel. A king room. Champagne service. The date jumped out at her like a slap, April 17th. Their anniversary. While she had been sitting at home with cooling food and melting candles, Alex had been checking into a hotel room with someone else. The room spun slightly as Wendy gripped the edge of his desk for support. This wasn't just a suspicion anymore, it was evidence, solid and irrefutable. Her hands trembled as she carefully folded the receipt and placed it back exactly where she'd found it. She wasn't ready to confront him yet. Not until she understood what she wanted to do with this information. Not until she could face him without falling apart. Walking back to the kitchen, she felt oddly calm, the eye of an emotional hurricane. The uncertainty that had been eating away at her for months had crystallized into a terrible clarity. She wasn't crazy. She wasn't overreacting. She wasn't imagining the distance. Her husband was having an affair, and he hadn't even respected her enough to hide it well. The breakdown came 3 days later, unexpected in its intensity. Wendy had been functioning on autopilot, going to work, preparing meals, maintaining conversations with Alex as if nothing had changed. They moved around each other like well-choreographed dancers, never truly connecting. She'd become an actress in her own life, playing the role of contented wife while gathering her thoughts, considering her options. The trigger was absurdly mundane, a coffee mug. Alex's favorite mug, the one she'd given him their first Christmas together, with a chip on the handle from when he'd dropped it years ago but refused to throw away because it had character. She found it in the sink, lipstick on the rim, the same burgundy shade she'd seen on his collar. He brought her into their home. While Wendy was at work, another woman had sat at their kitchen counter, drinking from Alex's favorite mug, leaving her mark so carelessly it seemed deliberate. Something fractured inside her. The mug shattered against the kitchen wall before she even realized she'd thrown it, ceramic shards skittering across the tile floor. Wendy slid down against the refrigerator until she was sitting on the cold kitchen floor, violent sobs racking her body. She cried for the love she'd believed in, for the future she'd planned, for the years she'd invested, for the person she'd lost along the way, herself. She cried until her throat was raw and her eyes burned, until there seemed to be no tears left, just hollow, gasping breaths. When the storm finally passed, leaving her exhausted but strangely clear-headed, Wendy knew she couldn't continue this charade. It was time to reclaim her life. "You've been suspecting this for months, haven't you?" Laura asked gently, passing Wendy another tissue across her living room coffee table. Laura had been Wendy's best friend since college. The one friendship she'd maintained despite Alex's subtle disapproval. His comments about Laura being a bad influence because she was divorced and outspoken. Now Wendy understood his real concern. Laura saw through pretenses. Wendy nodded, blowing her nose. "I kept telling myself I was imagining things, that I was being paranoid. that marriages go through phases. She laughed bitterly. I actually Googled how to be a better wife one night after he came home late again. As if I could somehow earn back his interest if I just tried harder. Laura reached across and gripped Wendy's hand tightly. Listen to me, one. You are not crazy. You are not paranoid. You are betrayed. There's a difference, and it matters. The words cut through Wendy's fog of self-doubt like a lighthouse beam through darkness. You've spent years shrinking yourself to fit into the space he allocated for you in his life. But that's not love, that's not even respect. Laura's eyes were fierce with protective anger. The question isn't whether he's having an affair. The evidence is clear. The question is, what are you going to do about it? For the first time in months, Wendy felt something other than confusion or despair. A tiny spark of determination, of righteous anger. I don't know yet, she admitted. But I know I can't keep living like this. I can't keep pretending. Laura nodded approvingly. That's the first step. Acknowledging the truth. The rest will follow. What began as curiosity evolved into methodical investigation. With Laura's encouragement, Wendy began quietly examining their financial records, bank statements, credit card bills, investment accounts. She'd always left the finances to Alex, trusting his expertise as a financial planner. Now, sitting at her laptop with spreadsheets open, patterns emerged that turned her stomach. Regular transfers to an account she'd never heard of. Large cash withdrawals. A separate credit card with charges for hotels, expensive restaurants, jewelry stores on dates that matched his business trips. But most alarming was the gradual movement of funds from their joint savings account to private accounts in his name, only systematic, careful withdrawals designed to go unnoticed. He wasn't just having an affair, he was preparing for a life without her. Securing his financial future while leaving her vulnerable. The betrayal cut deeper than the infidelity. This was calculated, premeditated. Wendy printed documents, highlighted suspicious transactions, created a timeline. With each discovery, her grief transmuted further into determination. The man she'd married, the one she'd trusted with her heart and future, had been methodically ensuring she would be left with as little as possible when he finally walked away. She thought about confronting him, demanding explanations for each deceptive transaction. But a new instinct, one of self-preservation, held her back. Knowledge was power, and for the first time in their relationship she had information he didn't know she possessed. She would use it wisely. You understand what you're asking for? The divorce attorney, an older woman with steel-gray hair and penetrating eyes, studied Wendy across her desk. An annulment rather than a divorce is harder to obtain. You'll need to prove fraud or misrepresentation that goes to the essence of the marriage. Wendy nodded, pushing forward the financial documents she'd compiled. He began moving assets within 6 months of our wedding. The affairs I've documented at least 3 separate women started within our first year. This wasn't a marriage that deteriorated. This was a man who never intended to honor his vows. Her voice remained steady, surprising herself with its strength. 2 weeks had passed since her discovery, 2 weeks of living alongside Alex, maintaining a facade while secretly planning her exit. She'd chosen her attorney carefully, Laura's recommendation, someone known for her thoroughness and unwillingness to be intimidated. I don't want just a divorce. I want it acknowledged that this marriage was never real, not on his part. The attorney reviewed the documents carefully, eyebrows rising occasionally. With this evidence of financial deception combined with the infidelity pattern, we have a solid case for annulment on grounds of fraud. But Wendy, she looked up, her expression grave. Preparing for this hearing means being ready for things to get ugly. He won't go down without a fight. Wendy straightened in her chair, feeling a certainty she hadn't experienced in years. I'm not afraid of ugly anymore. I've been living with it silently for years. I'm ready to fight it. Not just to leave, but to rise. The date for the hearing was set, June 15th, just 3 weeks away. Wendy maintained the pretense of normalcy at home, even as she secretly moved important documents and sentimental possessions to Laura's apartment for safekeeping. Alex, oblivious to her knowledge, grew increasingly careless, taking calls from his mistress in the next room, barely bothering to lower his voice. It was during one such call that Wendy, passing by his office, heard words that froze her in place. Once the divorce is finalized, we'll have everything settled. She has no idea about the accounts. Always trusted me with the finances. Pause, then a low laugh. She's always been so naive, so eager to please. Honestly, it's pathetic how blind she's been. Another pause. No, it won't be messy. Wendy avoids conflict at all costs. She'll take whatever settlement I offer just to keep things civil. That's her weakness. She cares too much about what people think. The casual cruelty, the dismissive assessment of her character, the smug confidence that she would continue to be malleable and blind, it should have devastated her. Instead, it crystallized her resolve. He had fundamentally misjudged her, mistaking her kindness for weakness, her trust for stupidity, her desire for harmony as fear of conflict. Wendy moved silently away from the door, a cold, clear purpose replacing any lingering doubt. Alex believed he knew her, believed he had calculated her every reaction. But he had no idea who she was becoming, who she had always been beneath the accommodating wife he'd molded. He was planning for a confrontation with a woman who no longer existed. The navy blue dress hung in Wendy's closet, untouched since the anniversary night. She ran her fingers over the silky fabric, remembering how she'd chosen it carefully for Alex, how she'd once measured her worth by his appreciation of her appearance. Today, she took it from the hanger with different intention. Today, she would wear it for herself, a reminder of the woman she had been and the woman she was becoming. The hearing was scheduled for 10 a.m. Alex didn't know she'd be there. He expected her to send only her attorney while he and his lawyer handled everything. Another example of how profoundly he had misjudged her. Wendy dressed carefully, applied her makeup with precision, styled her hair in loose waves. The woman in the mirror looked both familiar and new, stronger in the eyes, more defined in purpose. She fastened the silver bracelet from their last anniversary around her wrist, not as a token of sentiment but as a reminder of the deception she was finally confronting. Her phone buzzed with a text from Laura. "Car is here whenever you're ready." Wendy had splurged on a service she would normally have considered extravagant. A sleek black limousine to take her to the courthouse. Not because she wanted to impress anyone, but because for once, she was prioritizing herself. She deserved to arrive with dignity, with confidence, with a statement that said she valued herself even if Alex had not. Taking one last look around the bedroom they had shared, Wendy picked up her purse and walked out, closing the door on that chapter of her life. The courthouse bustled with morning activity, lawyers conferring with clients, clerks moving purposefully between offices, families waiting anxiously for their cases to be called. Wendy's attorney had arranged to meet her in a private consultation room 30 minutes before the hearing. The limousine dropped her at the side entrance, away from the main steps where she knew Alex would arrive. She wanted the element of surprise on her side. Through the tinted windows of the limousine, just before stepping out, she caught sight of them, Alex and a woman she recognized from photos on social media as Melissa, an associate from his firm. So this was the latest mistress. The one he'd been planning a future with while dismantling their marriage. They stood close together on the courthouse steps, Alex's hand casually resting on the small of her back in a gesture of intimacy that once would have wounded Wendy deeply. Now it merely confirmed what she already knew. More shocking was their demeanor. Laughing together, completely at ease, as if this day was a mere formality, a minor inconvenience on their path to happiness rather than the dissolution of a 5-year marriage. Alex checked his watch impatiently, said something to Melissa that made her laugh again, then guided her through the massive doors into the building. They hadn't seen Wendy. They had no idea what was coming. She gave them 5 minutes to get settled in the courtroom, 5 minutes to grow comfortable in their arrogance, before she would make her entrance. The limousine idled at the curb, its black exterior gleaming in the morning sunlight. Wendy took a deep breath, centering herself in the moment. Her attorney had briefed her thoroughly. She knew exactly what to expect in the courtroom, what questions might be asked, what evidence would be presented. Knowledge had replaced fear. Preparation had supplanted anxiety. When the chauffeur opened her door, Wendy emerged with a grace born of newfound confidence rather than practiced poise. The navy blue dress caught the light as she ascended the courthouse steps, her heels clicking rhythmically against the stone. Several heads turned to watch her. There was something in her walk, her expression, that commanded attention. Not beauty alone, though she was beautiful, but the magnetic pull of a woman fully present in her power. Inside, she followed the signs to Courtroom C, where her future would be decided. Her attorney waited outside the double doors, approval evident in her expression as Wendy approached. "Ready?" she asked simply. Wendy nodded. More than ready. Together they pushed open the heavy wooden doors. The courtroom wasn't large, but the sound of the doors opening echoed in the high-ceilinged space, drawing all eyes toward the entrance. Including his. Including hers. Alex's expression shifted from boredom to shock to alarm in rapid succession. Beside him, Melissa's confident smile faltered, then disappeared entirely. In that moment, watching their composure crumble, Wendy realized something profound. Power didn't have to shout. Sometimes it simply walked through the door. Alex whispered urgently to Melissa, whose face had drained of color. Whatever fantasy they had constructed about how this day would unfold was disintegrating before their eyes. Melissa stood abruptly, gathering her purse and phone. "I should go," Wendy heard her mutter to Alex. "This isn't... I didn't expect..." She couldn't even complete the thought, so rattled by Wendy's unexpected presence. Alex grabbed her wrist, trying to convince her to stay, but Melissa pulled free, avoiding eye contact with everyone as she hurried toward the exit. Wendy stepped aside slightly to let her pass, their eyes meeting briefly. What Wendy saw wasn't anger or defiance, but shame. Pure, unmasked shame in the face of the woman whose marriage she had helped destroy. Melissa pushed through the doors and was gone, the click of her retreating heels fading down the hallway. The courtroom remained silent for several beats, the tension palpable. Alex's attorney leaned over, urgently conferring with his now ashen client. Wendy took her seat beside her lawyer, arranging her dress carefully, outwardly calm despite her racing heart. She had not come seeking revenge or hoping to create a scene. She had come to stand in her truth, to face the end of her marriage with the same integrity with which she had entered it. But she couldn't deny the small flicker of satisfaction at watching the mistress flee, not because it hurt Melissa, but because it revealed the fragility of deceit when confronted with dignity. "Your Honor, we are requesting an annulment on grounds of fraud and misrepresentation," Wendy's attorney stated clearly, her voice carrying through the now hushed courtroom. She methodically presented the evidence Wendy had gathered, the financial documents showing systematic deception beginning just months after their wedding, the pattern of infidelity established through hotel receipts, credit card statements, and text messages Wendy had documented. Alex's attorney attempted to object several times, but each objection was overruled as the evidence mounted, incontrovertible and damning. Furthermore, her attorney continued, Mr. Patterson began transferring joint assets to private accounts within the first year of marriage, demonstrating a premeditated intent to defraud Mrs. Patterson of her rightful share of marital property. The judge, a woman in her 60s with reading glasses perched on the end of her nose, studied the documents with increasing concern. Mr. Patterson, she addressed Alex directly, do you wish to respond to these allegations? Alex straightened his tie nervously, glancing toward the door as if hoping Melissa might return to support him. Your Honor, these financial arrangements were made with my wife's knowledge. We had an understanding about our finances. The lie fell flat in the silent courtroom. The judge's expression made it clear she wasn't convinced. And the evidence of multiple extramarital relationships beginning within months of your wedding. Alex shifted uncomfortably. Marriages are complicated, Your Honor. It was a non-answer, and everyone knew it. Wendy sat perfectly still throughout the exchange, her eyes never leaving Alex, watching as the carefully constructed facade of his life crumbled under the weight of truth. The court finds sufficient evidence to grant an annulment on grounds of fraud that goes to the essence of the marital contract, the judge declared, removing her reading glasses. Mr. Patterson entered this marriage with demonstrable intent to deceive Mrs. Patterson financially and violated the covenant of fidelity from the earliest stages of the union. She turned to address Wendy directly. Mrs. Patterson, the court recognizes the injury you have suffered. This marriage is hereby declared null and void. Furthermore, given the evidence of financial misconduct, I am ordering a full accounting of all assets acquired during the period of this union with presumptive equal distribution regardless of whose name appears on the accounts. Alex slumped in his chair, the reality of his situation finally sinking in. Not only had his carefully laid plans for a financially advantageous exit from the marriage been thwarted, but his professional reputation would likely suffer once news of the hearing circulated. Financial planners who defrauded their spouses rarely retained clients' trust. The judge signed the decree and handed it to the clerk. This matter is concluded. For the first time since entering the courtroom, Wendy spoke. Her voice was calm but carried to every corner of the room. Thank you, Your Honor. Not just for your ruling, but for seeing the truth. She gathered her belongings and stood tall and poised in her navy blue dress. Alex remained seated, unable to meet her eyes as she walked past him toward the doors, head held high, no longer invisible, no longer diminished, no longer defined by his perception of her. Wendy stepped out of the courthouse into the bright June sunshine, feeling lighter than she had in years. The weight of pretense, of doubt, of constantly questioning her own perceptions had lifted, leaving her breathing freely for what felt like the first time since her wedding day. Laura waited at the bottom of the steps, breaking into a wide smile as she caught sight of her friend. Well, she asked as Wendy approached. It's done, Wendy replied simply. The annulment was granted. It's like the marriage never existed. There was wonder in her voice. Not sadness, but amazement at the clean slate before her. Laura hugged her tightly. I'm so proud of you, Wen. So incredibly proud. They walked arm in arm to the waiting limousine, ignoring the curious glances of passers-by. Inside the car, Wendy finally allowed herself a moment of release, not tears of grief, but of liberation. Where to, ladies? The chauffeur asked. Wendy and Laura exchanged glances. Remember that little Italian place we used to go to in college? Wendy asked. The one with the amazing tiramisu? Laura nodded, grinning. Venetos. It's still there. Venetos, please, Wendy instructed the driver. She wanted to celebrate this moment not with champagne in some trendy restaurant, but with comfort food in a place that held memories of who she had been before Alex, the independent, joyful woman she was reclaiming. As the limousine pulled away from the courthouse, Wendy didn't look back. There was nothing there she needed to see again. 6 months later, Wendy stood in the living room of her new apartment, surrounded by friends who had gathered to celebrate her housewarming. Sunlight streamed through the large windows, illuminating the space she had decorated entirely to her own taste, colorful, eclectic, filled with books and art she loved. The financial settlement had been fair, thanks to the judge's ruling and her attorney's persistence. She had enough to start over comfortably, to return to school for the master's degree she'd always wanted, to rebuild a life that reflected her true self rather than someone else's expectations. Laura arrived last, bearing a gift wrapped in silver paper. "For your new beginning," she said, hugging Wendy tightly. Unwrapping it, Wendy found a beautiful leather-bound journal, similar to the one in which she had first poured out her pain and confusion months earlier. Inside the front cover, Laura had written, "For writing new stories." Wendy's eyes filled with tears, happy ones this time. Later, after her friends had gone and the apartment was quiet, she curled up on her new sofa with a cup of tea and opened the journal to its first blank page. Her pen hovered for just a moment before she began to write. "Today, I became visible to myself, to the world, to the future I'm now free to create." Outside her window, the city lights sparkled against the darkening sky, each one a possibility in a world suddenly wide open with promise. If you enjoyed this story about redemption and self-discovery, please like this video, subscribe to the channel for more compelling stories, and share with friends who might need inspiration. Comment below with what resonated most with you or what lesson you took away from Wendy's journey.